This documentary examines the verified history and documented incidents inside Corcoran State Prison, a maximum security facility in California's Central Valley. Drawing from court filings, official investigations, and major news reports, the story explores lethal use of force controversies, entrenched prison gangs, and a high-risk blackout incident that exposed systemic vulnerabilities. Where details remain disputed or incomplete, they are clearly identified. If you want more real, fully researched crime documentaries like this, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling the stories others try to ignore. It was supposed to be routine. Another day inside a prison designed to never sleep, never blink, never lose control. But at Corcoran State Prison, control has always been fragile, held together by concrete, gun towers, and rules that only work when everyone follows them. According to court filings and contemporaneous news reports, the violence that erupted here didn't come from riots or mass breakouts. It came from silence. From the quiet decisions made on the yard. From moments when power failed, lights went out, and the line between order and chaos disappeared. Here is the contradiction that still defines Corcoran. This was a prison built to contain California's most dangerous inmates, yet it became one of the most scrutinized prisons in America for what happened under official supervision. According to public records, the facility opened in the late 1980s as part of a statewide expansion aimed at easing overcrowding. What followed instead was a concentration of high-security housing units, segregation yards, and prisoners already labeled management problems by the state. The Central Valley landscape offered isolation. Flat farmland. Endless horizons. And a prison complex that could operate away from the public eye. Inside those walls, power flowed in two directions at once. Official authority from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And unofficial authority enforced by gangs whose reach extended far beyond Corcoran's fences. By the early 1990s, Corcoran's name was already circulating in internal memos and investigative journalism for one reason: lethal force on the exercise yard. According to court records later reviewed in federal proceedings, multiple inmates were shot and killed by guards in what were officially described as use of force incidents. The justification, again and again, was the same. Prison officials said inmates were engaged in violent fights that posed immediate danger. Gunfire, they argued, was necessary to restore control. But lawsuits filed by families and civil rights organizations painted a different picture. According to sworn testimony and investigative reports, some shootings occurred under conditions where inmates were unarmed, contained, or allegedly encouraged to fight. These allegations were contested by the state, and not all claims were upheld in court. What remains verified is that Corcoran became the focus of federal scrutiny, leading to criminal charges against several correctional officers in the late 1990s. This is not speculation. This is public record. News reports from that period describe a prison where the yard itself became a weapon. Inmates affiliated with rival gangs were sometimes released together under conditions that increased the likelihood of violence. When fights broke out, guards positioned in elevated gun towers had authority to fire. According to prosecutors, the issue wasn't that shots were fired. It was when, why, and how often. Some officers were ultimately convicted. Others were acquitted. The cases exposed fractures inside the institution that went far beyond individual actions. They raised questions about training, supervision, and whether informal practices had replaced official policy. Yet even as Corcoran's reputation spread, the prison continued operating at full capacity. High-risk inmates kept arriving. And gang hierarchies kept evolving. Inside California's prison system, gangs are not street-level groups transplanted behind bars. They are organizations with structure, codes, and long memories. Court documents and academic studies describe how gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood, Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, and Black Guerrilla Family exert influence through race-based alliances, extortion, and violence. Corcoran, with its high-security yards, became a pressure cooker for these dynamics. According to publicly available intelligence summaries cited in litigation, gang leaders often exercised control indirectly. Orders moved through intermediaries. Violence could be delayed or accelerated based on strategic needs. A fight on the yard might be spontaneous. Or it might be calculated. Correctional staff were not operating in a vacuum. They were constantly assessing threat levels, anticipating retaliation, and trying to prevent coordinated attacks. In such an environment, mistakes carried lethal consequences. And then there were the blackouts. Power failures inside a maximum security prison are not just technical issues. They are crisis events. According to news reports and internal incident summaries, Corkran experienced a significant power outage that disrupted lighting, electronic doors, and surveillance systems. Exact causes were reported as electrical failures. Some details remain undisclosed for security reasons. What is verified is the impact. When the lights went out, officers had to rely on manual procedures. Cell doors that normally opened electronically required physical overrides. Surveillance cameras went dark. Communication slowed. For inmates already accustomed to testing boundaries, the blackout represented opportunity. Officials stated that emergency protocols were activated. Lockdowns were imposed. Additional staff were deployed. There is no public record of a mass escape or riot during the outage. But according to reports, tension escalated rapidly. Inmates banged on doors. Shouted threats echoed through housing units. And for hours, no one inside knew how long the darkness would last. This is where Corcoran's history matters. In a prison with a documented pattern of lethal force controversies, every emergency carries additional weight. Officers were aware of the scrutiny. Inmates were aware of the fear. According to former officials quoted in media investigations, the blackout forced everyone to confront a single reality: when systems fail, human judgment becomes the last line of defense. That judgment had already been questioned in courtrooms. As the power returned, Corcoran returned to routine. Counts resumed. Doors locked. The yard reopened under strict controls. But the incident added another layer to the prison's legacy. A reminder that even the most fortified institutions depend on fragile infrastructure. The state responded, according to public statements, by reviewing emergency preparedness and infrastructure reliability. Lawsuits continued to move through federal courts. Oversight increased. Training protocols were revised. Still, Corcoran remained what it had always been: a prison designed to hold men considered too dangerous for elsewhere. A place where violence was expected, but accountability was constantly tested. For the inmates, survival depended on affiliation, discipline, and silence. For the staff, survival depended on procedure, restraint, and constant vigilance. And between those two realities existed a narrow margin where errors became headlines. By the time the dust settled from the yard shootings and the blackout incident, Corcoran was no longer just a prison. It was a symbol. Cited in debates over use of force policy. Referenced in reforms. Studied by criminologists and legal scholars. But symbols don't capture daily life. Inside Corcoran, according to verified reports, days are long and nights are loud. Doors slam. Radios crackle. Orders are shouted and obeyed. Every movement is logged. Every confrontation carries history. The question that remains, and the question this documentary continues to explore, is not whether Corcoran was dangerous. That much is documented. The question is whether danger. Inside Corcoran State Prison, survival has never been random. According to court filings, investigative journalism, and academic studies on California's prison system, power inside Corcoran has long been shaped by an invisible government that exists parallel to official authority. This government does not wear uniforms. It does not issue written policies. But its rules are enforced with precision, speed, and violence. Prison gangs did not arrive at Corcoran as disorganized street crews. They arrived as institutions. By the time Corcoran became fully operational as a high-security facility, California's prison gang structure was already deeply entrenched. According to testimony presented in federal court and analysis from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, these gangs functioned as long-term criminal organizations with leadership hierarchies, enforcement mechanisms, and external communication networks that extended beyond prison walls. Race-based alignment was not optional. It was structural. Inmates entering Corcoran quickly learned that neutrality was often interpreted as weakness. Public records and sociological research confirmed that many prisoners were pressured to affiliate, not necessarily because they believed in gang ideology, but because affiliation offered predictability. Protection. Rules. A way to navigate a system where informal power often mattered as much as official regulation. The yard was where this power became visible. According to multiple lawsuits and news investigations, exercise yards at Corcoran were not simply places for recreation. They were controlled environments where gang politics played out in real time. Who walked where? Who stood with whom? Who made eye contact? These details carried meaning. Correctional officers were aware of these dynamics. Internal training materials and testimony describe constant monitoring of racial groupings and behavioral cues. A sudden shift in positioning could indicate an imminent assault. A refusal to participate in a group activity could signal internal discipline. And discipline, according to verified reports, was rarely symbolic. Assaults inside Corcoran were often swift and targeted. Court filings describe attacks involving improvised weapons, coordinated distractions, and strict adherence to gang orders. Violence was not always chaotic. In many cases, it was precise. The reasons varied. Debt. Disrespect. Suspected cooperation with authorities. Or orders originating from outside the prison, relayed through coded messages and intermediaries. Contraband played a central role. According to investigative reporting in criminal prosecutions, illegal cell phones, drugs, and weapons regularly found their way into Corcoran despite intensive security measures. Each item represented profit and leverage. Control over contraband routes meant control over people. Correctional staff faced constant pressure. News reports and union statements describe an environment where officers were understaffed, working long shifts, and responsible for managing inmates with nothing to lose. While most officers followed policy, court cases established that some crossed ethical and legal lines, either through corruption or excessive force. These incidents were not universal, but their existence shaped perception on both sides of the bars. For inmates, trust in the system was minimal. According to declarations submitted in civil rights lawsuits, many prisoners believed that reporting threats or assaults would lead to retaliation, either from gangs or from other inmates who viewed cooperation as betrayal. Protective custody was available, but it came with consequences: isolation, limited programming, and long-term labeling as vulnerable. So silence became currency. The gangs understood this better than anyone. Leadership within these organizations rarely required physical presence. According to court testimony, high-ranking members often operated through shot callers, who relayed instructions. Decisions were debated, voted on, and enforced according to internal codes. Breaking those codes could result in severe punishment, sometimes delayed for weeks or months to avoid detection. Corcoran security housing units intensified these dynamics. In isolation, communication became more covert. Hand signals. Notes. Coded language shouted through vents or plumbing. According to intelligence summaries cited in litigation, even lockdowns failed to completely sever gang coordination. This invisible government also influenced interactions with staff. According to investigative reports, some gangs sought to avoid unnecessary attention. Open chaos attracted lockdowns, searches, and transfers. Controlled violence, by contrast, allowed operations to continue. This created a paradox where periods of apparent calm masked underlying tension. Then came moments when the balance shifted. One such moment, according to news reports, occurred during large-scale searches and lockdowns aimed at disrupting gang activity. Cells were torn apart. Contraband seized. Leaders transferred. These actions temporarily weakened networks, but they also created power vacuums. Power vacuums invite violence. Court records describe spikes in assaults following major enforcement actions. Rival factions moved quickly to assert dominance. Old grievances resurfaced. New alliances formed. The cycle repeated. And always, the yard remained the stage. The legacy of the earlier use of force shooting still hovered over Corcoran during these years. Officers were acutely aware that every decision could be scrutinized. According to legal analysis, this awareness sometimes resulted in hesitation. At other times, it resulted in rigid adherence to protocol, even when flexibility might have diffused tension. Inmates noticed. According to statements reported by journalists, prisoners often tested boundaries, probing for weakness or inconsistency. A delayed response. An officer who avoided confrontation. These moments were logged mentally, shared quietly, and incorporated into gang strategy. The Blackout incident had amplified these calculations. When the power failed, even briefly, it confirmed a truth long understood inside: the system was not invincible. According to reports, gang leaders interpreted the outage not as a chance for immediate uprising, but as proof that infrastructure failures could expose opportunities in the future. Afterward, security tightened. But paranoia lingered. Every alarm, every flicker of light, every delay in door movement became a potential trigger. Staff increased drills. Inmates increased vigilance. The psychological toll mounted. Mental health professionals working with the prison population later testified in court filings about the cumulative stress. Hypervigilance. Anxiety. Sleep disruption. These conditions affected inmates and staff alike, contributing to mistakes, overreactions, and burnout. And yet, life inside Corcoran continued. Meals were served. Counts were taken. Programs operated within strict limits. The routine was relentless. According to official schedules, days were structured to the minute. But beneath that structure flowed an undercurrent of negotiation and threat. Who controls the phones? Who controls the drugs? Who decides who lives and who is marked? According to law enforcement experts quoted in national media, prison gangs like those operating at Corcoran are not simply violent groups. They are governance systems. They resolve disputes, enforce contracts, punish defiance. All without formal recognition. This reality complicates reform. When courts ordered changes to use of force policies and oversight mechanisms, those changes addressed only one side of the equation. The invisible government adapted. It always does. Transfers disrupted leadership, but also spread influence to other facilities. Lockdowns reduced contact, but increased reliance on smuggling. Surveillance improved, but so did counter-surveillance. Corcoran became a node in a statewide network. According to criminal indictments and sentencing memoranda, orders originating inside high-security units influenced crimes committed on the outside. Extortion. Assaults. Drug trafficking. The walls did not stop communication. They merely changed its form. For the public, Corcoran was a headline. A symbol of a broken system. For those inside, it was a living organism, constantly shifting, learning, and reacting. And then came another test. A sequence of events, documented in internal reports and later referenced in legal proceedings, suggested that the balance between official authority and the invisible government was about to be challenged again. Tensions escalated. Intelligence warnings circulated. Movement patterns changed. Something was coming. Inside Corcoran, everyone felt it. Officers tightened formations on the yard. Inmates whispered in corners. Doors slammed with extra force. According to those familiar with the environment, these were the signs that precede violence. Not chaos. Preparation. The system had weathered shootings. Lawsuits. A blackout. But the question remained unanswered. Inside Corcoran State Prison, the warning signs did not arrive all at once. They accumulated quietly, like pressure behind a sealed door. According to court filings, internal incident summaries referenced in litigation, and contemporaneous news reporting, the months leading up to the next major crisis were defined by escalation without release. Transfers increased. Lockdowns became more frequent. Intelligence bulletins circulated among staff, flagging heightened tensions between rival groups. None of this was unusual on its own. What made this period different was timing. Multiple stressors converged at once. First, staffing levels. According to union statements and investigative reports, Corcoran, like many California prisons at the time, faced chronic staffing shortages. Mandatory overtime stretched officers thin. Fatigue became routine. Decision-making under stress became the norm, not the exception. Second, overcrowding pressures continued to ripple through the system. Even high-security facilities were not immune. Court-ordered population caps elsewhere pushed difficult inmates into fewer available beds. Corcoran absorbed many of them. Third, oversight scrutiny intensified. After the earlier use of force prosecutions and civil settlements, every incident report was written with legal consequences in mind. According to former officials quoted in media coverage, this created an environment where officers felt simultaneously constrained and exposed. And finally, the gangs adapted. According to intelligence assessments cited in court proceedings, leadership structures inside Corcoran shifted during this period. Transfers removed some known shot callers, but replacements emerged quickly. Younger members moved up. Alliances adjusted. Old rules were reinterpreted. The result was instability. On the yards, positioning became aggressive. Groups tested each other's boundaries. According to incident logs referenced in lawsuits, staff intervened repeatedly to separate inmates before fights could erupt. Each intervention prevented immediate violence, but it also delayed resolution of underlying disputes. Delayed disputes tend to explode. The incident that followed would later be described in official language as a disturbance. That word, used in reports and press releases, obscures what actually happens when order teeters in a maximum security prison. It began with movement. According to multiple accounts summarized in investigative reporting, a routine yard release brought together inmates from opposing affiliations. The release complied with classification protocols on paper. In practice, the mix was volatile. Observers noticed it immediately. Officers in the gun towers adjusted posture. Ground staff tightened spacing. Inmates spread out, forming clusters that mirrored racial and gang lines. According to later testimony, communication among inmates intensified in those moments. Hand signals. Short verbal exchanges. Nothing overt enough to justify immediate lockdown. Then a fight broke out. Accounts differ on who threw the first punch. That detail remains disputed in various reports. What is consistent is the speed of escalation. Within seconds, multiple inmates were involved. According to official incident summaries, weapons were visible. Alarms sounded. Officers moved to intervene, following protocols shaped by years of litigation and reform. Verbal commands were issued. Chemical agents were prepared. Gun towers tracked movement but did not immediately fire. This hesitation was deliberate. According to expert testimony in later cases, Corcoran staff had been trained to exhaust non-lethal options whenever possible. The legacy of the earlier shootings weighed heavily on decision-making. Every action had to be defensible not just operationally, but legally. The fight did not stop. According to verified reports, additional inmates joined. The disturbance spread across the yard. Officers deployed chemical agents. Visibility dropped. Inmates scattered, some complying, others pressing the attack. At this point, the system's margin narrowed to inches. Radio traffic became chaotic. According to transcripts cited in litigation, overlapping calls created confusion about command authority. Requests for backup moved through multiple channels. Supervisors attempted to regain control while accounting for officer safety. In the midst of this, a critical failure occurred. According to internal reviews later referenced in court filings, a mechanical issue affected part of the yard's control infrastructure. Doors that should have secured movement zones did not respond immediately. The delay lasted minutes, not hours. In a prison environment, minutes are an eternity. The blackout incident from earlier years loomed in collective memory. Lights stayed on this time. Cameras functioned. But the sense of vulnerability was the same. According to those familiar with the incident, inmates recognized the hesitation. Some retreated. Others exploited it. Eventually, order was restored. The official timeline indicates that officers regained control without lethal force. Injuries were reported. Some inmates required hospitalization. Staff injuries were also documented. The yard was locked down. Investigations began immediately. From the outside, it looked like a contained event. From the inside, it felt like a near miss. According to internal assessments quoted in later reporting, the disturbance exposed weaknesses in coordination, infrastructure, and communication. None of these weaknesses were catastrophic on their own. Together, they formed a chain. A chain that could have ended very differently. In the aftermath, Corcoran entered a prolonged lockdown. Programs were suspended. Visitation restricted. Cells were searched repeatedly. According to public statements, contraband was seized. Weapons recovered. Intelligence gathered. The invisible government responded as well. According to law enforcement experts, lockdowns disrupt gang operations temporarily, but they also harden them. Members interpret mass searches as collective punishment. Retaliation plans are postponed, not abandoned. Inside cells, the waiting began. Court filings describe inmates spending weeks confined for 23 hours a day. Mental health staff reported increased stress, anxiety, and incidents of self-harm. Officers reported burnout and frustration. The human cost mounted quietly. Meanwhile, administrators faced scrutiny from multiple directions. Civil rights attorneys requested records. Oversight bodies reviewed footage. Media outlets filed public records requests. The question was not whether force had been used. It was whether force had been avoided at the right cost. According to commentary from criminal justice analysts, Corcoran represented a paradox of reform. Policies designed to reduce lethal outcomes increased reliance on complex coordination under extreme stress. When that coordination faltered, risk spiked. The incident did not result in new criminal prosecutions. That fact is verified. But it did influence policy discussions. Training updates. Infrastructure investment proposals. Emergency response reviews. Still, the underlying tension remained. According to interviews with former inmates published in investigative pieces, the disturbance reset informal hierarchies. Those who stood their ground gained status. Those who retreated lost it. Even compliance carried meaning, depending on context. For officers, trust was tested. According to union representatives quoted in news reports, staff questioned whether they had sufficient support, staffing, and equipment to manage escalating risks. They also feared that any future mistake would be judged harshly in hindsight. This fear shapes behavior. Experts in correctional psychology note that fear of punishment can lead to either overreaction or paralysis. Both are dangerous. Corcoran walked that line daily. As weeks turned into months, normal operations slowly resumed. Yards reopened under modified schedules. Inmates returned to programs selectively. The official narrative emphasized stability. But stability at Corcoran has always been conditional. According to data cited in academic studies, violence levels fluctuate, but never disappear. The aftermath did not arrive with sirens or headlines. It arrived with paperwork. Inside Corcoran State Prison, the most consequential changes after the disturbance were quiet, procedural, and slow. According to public records, court filings, and reporting from major California news outlets, the final fallout of Corcoran's most scrutinized years unfolded not as a single reckoning, but as a series of administrative decisions that reshaped how the prison would be watched, judged, and remembered. The immediate response was documentation. Incident reports multiplied. Body-worn camera policies, where applicable, were reviewed. Surveillance footage was preserved and catalogued. According to legal experts familiar with correctional oversight, this phase matters more than public statements. It determines what can be challenged, defended, or quietly settled later. Families of injured inmates requested records. Civil rights attorneys filed motions. Oversight agencies asked pointed questions. None of this was unprecedented. What was different was the context. Corcoran already carried the weight of history, earlier use of force prosecutions, federal convictions of officers in the 1990s, and a national reputation forged in courtrooms. Every new incident reopened old files. According to legal analysis published at the time, Corcoran became a reference point in broader debates about California's prison system. When lawmakers discussed staffing shortages, Corcoran was cited. When advocates argued about use of force standards, Corcoran appeared in footnotes. When experts testified about gang governance behind bars, Corcoran was used as an example of how informal power structures survive reform. The prison itself remained operational. That fact is important. Despite lawsuits, settlements, and oversight, Corcoran was never shut down. No mass firings followed the disturbance described in Chapter 3. According to official statements, disciplinary actions were handled internally where warranted. Policies were revised. Training was updated. Infrastructure assessments were conducted. To the outside world, this looked like closure. Inside, it felt like a reset without relief. According to interviews with former inmates published in investigative journalism, the return to normal operations did not erase what had happened. Hierarchies established during the disturbance solidified. Debts incurred during lockdowns came due. Old tensions resurfaced under new rules. Gangs adjusted again. Court records and law enforcement testimony make clear that prison gangs are resilient precisely because they plan for disruption. Lockdowns are anticipated. Transfers are absorbed. Leadership losses are replaced. The invisible government adapts faster than formal systems. This reality complicated reform efforts. Following the disturbance, California correctional administrators emphasized de-escalation training and non-lethal responses. These efforts were real and documented. But critics argued, according to op-eds and advocacy reports, that training cannot compensate for chronic understaffing and overcrowding. Officers echoed that concern. Union representatives publicly stated that while accountability was necessary, so was support. According to their statements, expecting perfect judgment under extreme conditions without adequate staffing and equipment placed officers at risk of both physical harm and legal exposure. That tension remains unresolved. Corcoran's legacy is not just about what happened on a yard or during a blackout. It is about the collision of ideals and realities. A system designed to balance safety, punishment, and rehabilitation operating under constant pressure. The courts played a defining role. While no new criminal convictions emerged from the later disturbance, Corcoran continued to appear in civil litigation. Some cases were dismissed. Others settled. According to court dockets, these outcomes rarely produced sweeping judgments. Instead, they resulted in incremental changes, revised protocols, compensation, and mandated reporting. Incremental change is harder to dramatize than scandal. But it shapes institutions. Over time, Corcoran's operational culture shifted. According to former administrators quoted in media interviews, decision-making became more centralized. Documentation increased. Risk tolerance decreased. This reduced the likelihood of extreme outcomes, but it also slowed response times. In high-security prisons, seconds matter. Experts in correctional management note that excessive caution can be as dangerous as recklessness. Corcoran's leadership had to navigate between these extremes under constant scrutiny. For inmates serving long sentences, the legacy was deeply personal. According to declarations filed in court, some inmates described Corcoran as a place where survival required constant calculation. Who to stand with. When to speak. When to stay silent. The disturbance reinforced that lesson. It demonstrated how quickly stability could vanish and how slowly it returned. Mental health impacts lingered. Public health evaluations cited in litigation documented increased anxiety, depression, and stress-related symptoms among incarcerated populations following prolonged lockdowns. Staff experienced similar effects. Burnout, absenteeism, and early retirement increased, according to workforce data discussed in oversight hearings. These are not abstract consequences. They shape daily interactions. A tired officer is slower to notice warning signs. A traumatized inmate is quicker to perceive threats. The cycle feeds itself. Outside the walls, Corcoran's name entered a different phase of public consciousness. It was no longer just the prison where guards shot inmates, a label forged decades earlier. It became shorthand for systemic complexity. A place used by journalists and scholars to illustrate how reforms collide with entrenched realities. This shift matters. Symbols influence policy. When Corcoran was invoked in legislative hearings, it framed discussions about funding, training, and oversight. According to transcripts from those hearings, lawmakers cited Corcoran to argue both for stricter controls and for increased resources. The same facts supported opposing conclusions. That is Corcoran's paradox. Was it an example of abuse corrected by accountability? Or a warning that accountability alone cannot fix structural strain? According to experts, it is both. The Blackout incident, the yard shootings of the past, and the later disturbance together tell a single story. Modern prisons are complex systems where human judgment, infrastructure,